Hello everyone, and welcome back. This week we are going to be focusing more on animation, but this time lights and cameras, and then once you animate, what to do with that, how to render at least a preview, so you can kind of more accurately evaluate what you're doing and make sure that it's looking the way you want to before you create the final product. So let's jump in. We're back on the ray gun, and I've changed the lighting a little bit from what it was. I turned off the teal light, and I also changed the purple light. I dialed back the intensity. I liked that as a stylistic still frame, but for animation I wanted something a little bit more easy to see everything. So I've got a pretty simple setup right here. We turn on my overlays and make sure my lock camera to view is off. As I rotate around, see I have a top light up here. This is just giving me some soft fill overhead. That's actually in a separate light set, but that's okay. So if I just go through these individually, so here's my top light. Okay, just a nice soft overhead light. And then I have my little fill. I made it slightly warmer just for some contrast, some color contrast. And then I have a background light, which actually is a little too weak right now, so let's double that maybe. Oh, it would help if I was on the correct light. Okay, so let's try 2000. Of course, we can make those adjustments later. So it's just those three lights. Nothing too complicated there. But let's start animating, and I'm just going to jump right in with the first shot that I have in mind. And again, we're going to be focused on animating lights and cameras, and it's not just going to be about moving, rotating, and scaling, but actually animating some of the other properties of these. So I'm going to hit 0 on my number pad to go back into my camera view. And if I select my camera, I still have keyframes from different angles and setups last time, so I could really choose any of these. I'm just going to choose the middle one, just the one floating in space, and I will delete the other two keyframes. I can just do that by selecting them on the timeline and hitting delete. That also reminds me, I will turn on my screencast keys. There we go. Oh, and I immediately hit shift or caps lock, which seems to, for some reason, sometimes disable screencast keys. Okay. So there we have it. I need to turn off caps lock, so let me do that one more time. There we go. Alright. So I deleted those keyframes. I also need to select my ray gun parent and do the same thing, delete those keyframes as well. Just that one keyframe. There we go. Okay. So I got rid of those keyframes. I can even move this one. Hit G and move that to frame 1. Same thing with the camera. Okay. So at a good starting point. And so what I want to do is I'm going to think about this as a few shots in sequence. And for my first shot, if I want to do like a product reveal sort of animation, the first shot I want to be, I'm going to turn off my area light on the right, I'm going to turn off my overhead light, and I'm just going to focus on this background light and the camera. So this is going to be, I usually work in roughly 5 seconds, and I'll over-animate. What I mean by that is I will give myself padding on the front and the back of the shot so that once I render everything, I've got a little bit of play in the edit, and I don't have to go back and re-render things because, oh, I made that 6 frames too short. So I'm going to go with 120 frames, which if we're doing 24 frames a second, which we are, oops, it's in this one, right here, 24 frames a second. So 120 frames is going to be 5 seconds, which is a pretty good length of time. You might even want to go a little bit longer, but let's at least block in the animation. We can always make those adjustments later. So, said all that to say this. Let's grab that backlight. Okay. It may also be helpful if you go up at the top here to the animation render set. You can see a couple of different views, as well as you get the dope sheet down here. So in this left view, I'm going to hit number pad 0. I'm also going to hit Z and go into material preview. And this is going to give me a preview of roughly what it will look like rendered. Not the final thing, but give me a good idea and still allow me to play back it pretty close to real time. You'll notice it doesn't actually look like what the lights do, and that's because up here I need to set my viewport shading to use the scene lights and the scene world. And now it's much more accurate. I can also go into my rendered view and you can just kind of compare what they look like. With a simple light setup like this, they're pretty identical. Okay. So I'm going to, with this backlight selected, I want to animate the intensity. So at frame 1, I want that power to be 0. So once I have that set where I want it, I'm going to hover over it and hit I. And that's going to insert a keyframe. You see it turns yellow. Remember that from last week. And we get the keyframe on frame 1. And then, let's say, maybe frame 80. So it'll give us some time with full intensity after the fact. We'll bring this up. And I don't even think 2000 was enough, so let's try 4000. And hit I. Okay. I just want to go to render view real quick and double check that. Nah, maybe we go even brighter. Let's try 8000. Alright, we'll get silly with it. We'll go 16,000. Thank you, Creative Cloud, for being annoying. Go away. Alright. Yeah, that looks about what I want that to be. So once I have that set, I'm going to hover over that again, because hit I, and now we've got that yellow back, so that's good. We can hit spacebar and play it. You can notice up here, my frames per second, it's only playing back at 15 frames a second. So, oh, it's because I was in rendered view. Let me go to material preview. And get a better sense of what it's doing. It's still playing back slow. And the reason for that is, if I go to my ray gun here, I have subsurface modifiers on everything at a level of at least 2. And so it has to calculate all of that every frame. I also have some additional modifiers that don't really need to be there anymore, so I can click apply on those. I guess I don't have to hit apply, but I'm going to for a few of these anyway. But so it's doing all the subdivision calculation. So if I go up to my render properties, there's this section called simplify. And if I check that and expand it, I have this Viewport Max Subdivisions. And what this will do is it's kind of a master control, which will change that viewport subdivision settings for everything in the scene. So right now it's set to 6, which is a really high default, I think. But if I set that to 0, you can see all my subdivision surfaces go away and things get really blocky. But if I play it back, now I'm getting a smooth 25 frames a second for, I don't know why it's not playing back at 24. But for you Europeans, that'll make sense because that's PAL is 25 frames a second. I can try also, if I set that to 1 and get a little bit of smoothness. Yeah, we're close enough, so we'll keep it at 1. Just make sure you turn that off before you render. Although I guess on render it is set to 6 subdivisions, so that works. Okay, so we have our light animation pretty much set. It's not bad, but I want to add a little bit more interest and a little bit more drama to this already fairly dramatic shot. So I'm going to go over to frame 1. And I'm going to select my camera. And for this, I'm going to jump into solid view just so I can see my framing. And I want to do just a slow push in. So at frame 1, I'm going to hit G and Y and move it back a little bit. I'm also going to move it down. I want that a little bit more centered. We'll start there. I'll hit I. And we'll insert a location keyframe. And then for this, I'm going to go all the way to the last frame. GUI, move it in. Okay. Hit I. Location. And now let's play it back. Nope, let's play it back with some drama. There we go. And control space will maximize whatever area that your mouse is hovered over. So if you need to maximize anything, that's the shortcut. I'll hit play. There we go. That's looking pretty dramatic. Now one thing is you can see the gun kind of moves up, and I think it's partly because it's not perfectly centered. But I want the camera to tilt up as it pushes in, so I'm going to add one more thing, and this is something that I do for almost every camera shot that I add, and that's going to be a look target. So I'm going to hit Shift C to center my 3D cursor, and I'll zoom in here. Shift A, add in a plane axis, and up here we're going to name this. We'll call this Cam 01 look for the look target. I'm also going to rename my camera, and I'll call this Cam 01 silhouette. Okay, so I've got that, and now with my camera selected, I'm going to go to this constraints properties, and we're going to add an object constraint track 2. Click on that, and then it's looking for a target, and that's going to be, if I start typing in cam, see my camera 1 look target, and we get this little blue relationship line, but the camera by default isn't looking in the right direction. So we need to tell it 2 is going to be negative Z, and up is going to be Y, and now it's pointing right at that. I've got a few other options you don't really need to worry about. You can animate the influence if you wanted to maybe go between 2 or there's a bunch of different uses for that, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So I'm just going to go to side view, and I'm going to move my target up to roughly the center of the gun, maybe a little bit lower. Okay. Now when you play this back, as it gets closer, you can see the camera is doing a little bit of a tilt up. It's subtle, but I think it really works. Okay, so that's shot 1. Pretty simple, animated, only 2 values, and used a really easy look target. So let's move on to the next shot. Okay, so I'm going to have, by the end of this, 3, 4, maybe 5 different camera moves in this scene. And you can set up animation actions and all of that, but I want to keep it a little bit simpler. So I'm just going to change my frame range here. So frame 1 to 120 is going to be this first shot. And I'm going to jump, I'll give myself some padding here, say 30 frames. And I'm going to change my range from 150 to, let's say 300. We'll go another 150 frames. It's probably too much, but that's okay. Alright, so now what I want to do, I'm going to animate another light in a different way and using a modifier in the graph editor, which will be pretty cool. So we'll actually do this in 2 different ways for some effect lighting. The first is going to be kind of a lightning effect. So I'm going to add in a new light. This is going to be a spotlight. And you can see I've got some additional little empties here that were part of my gun creation process, so I'm just going to hide those because I don't need them. I'm also going to turn on my render toggles, so if there's any individual part that I don't want to render, I can make sure I toggle that off. Okay. So I've added a spotlight, and in front view here, I'm just going to move it up over here. We can rotate it over there. In side view, I'm going to rotate it back just a little bit and move it back along the y-axis. Okay. And make sure these are still going. I don't know why they stopped. Okay. So let's check this in the viewport here. Obviously we need to increase the power. Let's try 1,000. Okay. So this is going to be lightning. Lightning can be pretty harsh, so let's make it 10,000. Let's go to like 30,000. Let's be reckless. Okay, we might need to go a little bit more on that, but that's a good start. I'm also going to just make this a little bit blue. Something like that, I think. Okay. The size is pretty good. Yeah, I think that's gonna work. I'm also gonna just piggyback off of my camera 1 look target, since it's in the center of the gun and that's what I want, and just add a track 2 constraint to this light. Negative Z and Y. You know what? It's actually, I'm gonna be responsible, and I'm gonna duplicate this look target, and we'll rename it. We'll call it lightning look. Okay, and then the spotlight, we will call this lightning. I'm going to move this to a new collection that I will call lightning group. Click OK. Grab my look target for this as well, and hit M to move it to lightning group. Okay. So now I have my own group that I can toggle this on and off as needed. Okay, so I want to just lower this light down a little bit. It's looking pretty good. Yeah. I'm also just going to expand the size of the shape and increase the blend here. Let's go all the way up to 180. I don't want it to feel like there's a spotlight hitting it. I do want it to feel more like lightning. So actually, let's go with a sun lamp instead, in which case I'm going to take 2 zeros off of that. We'll go to 300. Let's try 100. It's maybe a little bit more accurate. 10's not going to be enough. 50 maybe? Okay, we'll go with 50. Okay, now we're ready to animate this. And this is a time when it's really good to look at reference video of lightning. There's actually a really good Slow-Mo Guys video, if you're not familiar, of lightning in slow motion. I think they're in Singapore, maybe? So let me just real quick find this. Lightning isn't just like a light switch on and off. It flickers, it has varying in intensities, and it hits a couple of times. So if we go here, okay, so we're going to mute this. These guys are fantastic if you're not familiar, but okay, so we can watch some lightning here. You get one big flash, but then you get there's a little bit of other light. In this case, it's like slowly growing in intensity, and then it hits. Sometimes there's multiple bolts at the same time. Yeah, that was super slow lightning. But watch a bunch of reference video, get a feel for how lightning works, and then we can come back in here and approximate it. So I'm going to be animating the strength here. I'm going to start on frame 150, and the strength is going to be at 0. And I'm going to hit I to insert that keyframe. And then let's say I'll give it like roughly a second and a half. I'm going to add another keyframe there. See the lines appear between the two keyframes? Tells me the value doesn't change. So really I only need this second keyframe, so I can select that first one and delete it. It's going to stay that intensity until I tell it otherwise. And then lightning happens pretty quick, so I'm going to go maybe 4 frames later, and we'll go to 50. And we're going to replicate not just one bolt of lightning, but maybe a little bit of a lightning storm. So go a few frames later, we'll go down to maybe 2 or 1, hit I. A little bit later, and I don't want to go quite as strong, so let's maybe say 20 or 10, hit I. A couple frames later, we'll go down to 2, and then we'll go to like 4, 5 maybe. Okay, and then a few frames maybe out to there, we'll go to 0 and hit I. Okay, so just a real quick animation. It's all right, not great. But here's where that modifier comes in. So I'm going to change this top view here to the graph editor, and then I've got my light selected. I've got the strength. I'm going to double click on that and hit number pad period. That's going to frame it up. So here's that animation that I just did. Like I said, it's not great, but we can make it better. So with everything selected, I'm going to hit N, and it's going to bring up my properties here in the graph editor. I'm going to go to the modifiers tab. I'm going to add a noise modifier. Expand this out a little bit so you can see. So blend type we want to replace. Or actually no, we want to multiply. So click multiply, and now this gets a lot more jagged. So let's hit play again. And I'm going to change my frame range just so I don't have to wait quite as long for this to repeat. Go 170 to 230 will be good for now. Okay, so you can see a little bit of a flicker there. But this adjustment has dropped from 50 down to 30. So I'm going to play around with some of these settings and hopefully fix that. So you can see the scale, what that does. If I go out, now it gets really smooth, and if I bring that down, it gets a little bit messier. So that's one option here. We have the strength, and this is where I can make sure that peak is still hitting where I want it to. So we go with 1.7. Phase will it'll actually shift the curve left and right. It's not super apparent here because I have keyframes that are varying the intensity, but that's what phase does. Depth, I'm actually honestly not 100% sure. Amount of fine level detail present in the noise. Okay, so it's kind of how many small changes there are. If I go back to 1 with depth, you can see that's a much smoother. Maybe we go 5 is probably too much. It's like 3. And then offset, that's the time offset for the noise effect. So now you can see how that curve is moving down, but we can keep that at 0. We can also restrict the frame range. So if we only want it to happen at certain frames, we can do that. both where it starts and where it ends. A number of frames from start frame for influence to take effect. So we've got some great options there, and then we can also adjust the influence. Really all I had to do was adjust the scale and the strength, and now we'll hit play. Okay, so now that we have the lightning kind of blocked in, we can kind of start evaluating and tweaking. I want this first bolt to be even brighter. So even with this curve modifier, I can still I can either go to that frame and adjust it here in the properties, or I can just, in the graph editor, hit G to move it around and hit Y to move it only in the vertical direction. And we can see what that looks like that's at 90. Let's go up even more. Let's go like 120 and see what that looks like. what I want it to look like is I want it to be blown out for one frame, because lightning sometimes does that, particularly on camera, because the intensity changes so quickly, cameras don't have time to adjust. So that's what I want to try to replicate here. I'm going to hit N also to hide that. Hit A to select everything, and number pad period to frame it up. Okay. I also want it to be a little bit more sudden, so I'm going to grab these first two frames. I'm just going to move them over. It's going to be a sharper peak here. And yeah, I think we need to adjust this so that let's try like 300. Maybe we'll go all the way up to 1,000. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this is super ridiculously bright. But it's not going to be that bright for long. So if I play that back... Okay. That's something. Now what I want to do, just one more little tweak. I'm going to add a little kind of pre-shock here. So I'm going to go back 2 frames before the start of this. And I'm just going to set this to like maybe 0.5. Come on. There it goes. It just wasn't turning yellow for some reason. And I'll go another 2 frames back, and we'll set that to 0. And hit I. Okay. See how that feels. I don't think we're quite reading that before it goes, so let's give that a little bit more space. Move it back 1 more frame. Let's actually move that back even more. And I'll actually bring it down to 0 here. So it's like a pre-shock. There we go. Okay, and I can continue tweaking this for a few more minutes, but I think you get the idea here of what this lightning can be. Change the timing, and again, reference images to a reference video to get it closer. So there's lightning. As far as a lighting effect, as far as the camera placement here, you could really do whatever you want. It's I would personally tend towards putting a camera somewhere so that the lightning was kind of on the opposite side of the gun, so that we get really nice kind of contrast and rim lighting. Like if I go to this angle, and we'll go into material preview here, turn on scene lights and scene world. Okay, maybe something like that. What we can do, we can set up a camera here real quick. So we'll say, we'll add in a camera. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to move that camera just yet. I'm also going to hide that. Okay. I'm going to kind of put my viewport where I want that camera to be, and then if I hit Control Alt number pad 0, whoops, I'm going to undo that real quick. I need to make sure it was moving the wrong camera. It moved the active camera, which is this one, the silhouette one. So what I actually need to do, aside from turn my screencast keys back on, because I keep hitting caps lock, is I need to select the new camera, hit Control 0. It's going to make that the active camera. Now I can just move my viewport where I want it to be. Let's say maybe like this. And then Control Alt number pad 0. What that does, I can go to the View menu here in Cameras, or actually Align View, that's where it is. Align View, and then Align Active Camera to View. That's the shortcut that I just did. So once I have that, we can rename this camera. So we're going to call this Cam 02 Lightning. Okay, and I'm going to move this into my Lightning group. I'm also going to go to my camera options. I'm probably okay. Well, no, let's go up to like an 85mm lens. And yeah, I'm going to hit N in the viewport, go to my view, lock camera to view, and just kind of orbit around, try to get a interesting starting view here. Okay. I'm going to change my frame range back to 150, and we can end at 230 is probably fine. This doesn't need to be a long shot. Okay. So once I have that, we'll go to frame 1, or the first frame, which is frame 150. And I'm going to, we'll turn off our lock camera to view. I'm going to hit I for location. I'm only going to animate location here. I'm not going to worry about a look target. This is going to be a very simple move. So I'm just going to hit, I'll go to my last frame here. I'm going to hit G, X, and just move it down just a little bit. Maybe to there. And I, location, we'll hit play to play that back. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And we're easing in and easing out, which usually I like. But in this case, because I know this shot is going to be cut in sequence in the edit, I don't want to see it slow down and start. I just want continuous movement in all the cameras. So I'm going to jump back here to my graph editor. And my X location is what I animated, so I'm going to double click on that, number pad period, to frame it up. And I'm going to hit T and change the interpolation to linear. Now it's going to be a straight line. It's going to be a constant speed. Okay. Now one thing that I might also consider for this shot is just hiding the ground. Okay, I think it's going to be close enough that we don't need to see the ground, we don't miss it. And I think it gives a pretty cool effect there. So, there's lightning. There's one more lighting effect that I want to do that's going to be pretty similar, actually. So I'll turn that off, turn off the lightning group. And we're going to, for this one I don't think I'm going to animate a camera. We'll just use the silhouette camera. So I'm going to select that in the outliner and then hit Control 0. I'll jump to that view. Okay. For this, we'll start our frame here at 250 and we'll end at, I don't know, 350 will be fine. Okay. So that works. And I will jump back into my viewport, my second viewport. Alright. So let's turn the... let's see, where did I put my grounds? Oh, they're up here. Okay. We'll turn the grounds back on. Okay, so there's our silhouette. And this is going to be a fire effect. So I'm going to animate flames. And I'm going to do this the same way I would do this if I was lighting for fake fire in real life. And that's going to be with some spotlights and, again, that noise curve modifier. So I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to add in another light. And this is going to be a spot. It's actually going to stay a spot this time. I'm going to name this. We're going to call this Fire we'll call it fire spot 1. I'm going to hit M in the viewport, and I'm going to create a new collection. We're going to call this fire group. Click OK. And then from side view, I'm just going to move it kind of over here. And then in the top view, we'll move it over to the side just a little bit, something like this. Okay, so it's kind of down in front. All right. And then for this, I am going to use a look target. So Shift-A, add an empty plane axis. I'm going to call this one fire light look. I'm going to move this to my fire group as well. I'm actually going to click on this little box icon here in the next to fire group. That's going to make it the active collection, and that means any new object that I add is automatically going to be added to that group. Okay, so I've got my firelight look target. I'm going to move it up, and we'll move it back a little bit, and maybe we'll move it over a little bit too. Okay, so there's that. And now I'm going to select my light, and I'm going to give it that track to constraint, -Z and Y, and we're going to set this to, this is again why naming is important, firelight look. Okay, so now it's pointed right at that. We can jump back to our light properties here and start getting it set up. So let's try, we'll start with 2000. It's going to be probably a little bit too bright. Maybe we'll knock that back to like 1200. I'm also going to change the color. Again, we want to be firelighty. Maybe something like that. You can see it's almost reading as gold on the silver finish, but that's fine. So that's looking pretty good. The size I want to keep pretty small because I do want the hard shadows here. If we kind of zoom in, I do want these to be relatively hard shadows, so maybe we'll go to like 0.05. It'll make those shadows a little bit harder. And I think we're going to, so here's where I want to go into rendered preview. Try to get my light set a little bit more. I want this to feel not quite as even, so I'm going to bring the spot size in. Let's try like 15. We'll increase the blend. 15 was obviously too much. Something like that. Well, maybe. Maybe something like that. Okay. So it's pretty isolated. We can zoom in here. You can see we've got our fall off. It's no blend. Yeah, okay. I think we'll do that. Again, we can always adjust that later if we want to. And now what we need to do is animate it. So this animation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to hover over it and hit I for power. And then we'll jump to the last frame here. And I'm not going to change the value. I'm just going to add another keyframe. Okay, now I can jump into my graph editor. I'm going to change that to material preview as well. We'll go back to our graph editor and double click on power, hit number pad period to frame it up. So I've got a straight line, value's not changing. But we can hit N to bring up our modifiers, add another noise modifier. And you can see this is a lot. This is too much really. So I'm going to bring this strength down. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, I just need more room here. So we're going to shrink that down here for a second. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Zoom out. It looks really extreme, but let's zoom out here. Keep an eye on the left side here and look at your scales. So right now, this intensity at the lowest is 1199.6, and at the highest is 12,000.4. So it's really only varying like 1 watt, which is hardly noticeable. Okay, hit play, it's like nothing's happening. So if I control middle mouse down to bring that scale way down, now we can see our scale is much larger. And as I... Actually, it's probably not the scale, it's probably the strength that I want to adjust. There we go. Bring that strength up. Now we're getting somewhere. Put that scale back to 1. Okay. Now this is, again, take a second, go on YouTube, watch some, like, firelight, or next time you have a bonfire, or fireplace, whatever. Kind of take notice of how that fire is behaving as far as light intensity is concerned. We'll start with something like that. And now we'll hit play. And let's see if we can get a better sense of what this is doing. You can see a little bit of flicker there, but not a whole lot. I'm going to increase the scale. Okay. Now it's really only varying between, let's say, 800 and 1500. So let's see. Get a little bit more of that. I want to increase the strength some more. Let's go to like 1500 on the strength. Okay, so it's got a pretty big range, top to bottom, about 1500 actually. A little less, but pretty close. And we can play back. That's feeling better. It's feeling a lot better. Okay. So there's our first one. And way to get more realistic feeling light when you're doing this for, you know, for real or for fake in 3D, is actually to have multiple sources. That's why I call this fire spot 1. So I'm going to jump back into my viewport, if I can learn how to click. There we go. And I'm going to, with the light selected, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, and I'll move it kind of over and down a little bit, and I'll duplicate it one more time. Maybe we'll go like over here. Okay. So now we have 3 lights, and I hit play, and it's not really looking any different, and that's because I've duplicated it exactly, and the settings are all the same. So now we need to add some variation. For this light, I might go maybe a little bit more red. Okay. And for this light here, actually I want this one to be more red. It's not going to matter too much, but I want it different. There we go. Okay. And this one will be a little bit more yellow. Once I have that, we can go back into our graph editor. And I'm going to just be selecting things here in the outliner. I also need to rename them, so this is going to be Fire Spot 2. And this one, just double clicking on it. Or you can hit F2 to rename. This will be Fire Spot 3. So, Fire Spot 2, I'm going to select, well, with the whole curve selected, I'm just going to hit G and Y, and it's going to bring that whole intensity down. Okay, so now I've done that. I'm going to turn off 3 for a second, so now we're just looking at the 2, 1 and 2. Okay, now we've got a little bit more of the red in there. There's a second kind of flicker. I'm going to change this scale. Let's go to like 4 maybe. Okay, just trying to get some randomness in there. That's feeling pretty good. I like what that's doing. And maybe the scale doesn't need to be, or the strength doesn't need to be quite so high. Maybe we'll go to like 800 on the strength and bring this down. So this will be just kind of a subtle underglow maybe. Okay, we can turn off Fire Spot 1 and just look at what this is doing. Okay. And then pause that. Let's go to spot 3. And this one, I'm going to decrease the scale. Let's go to like 1.8 at the scale. It's also showing up as a little green, so I want to pull that hue back a little bit. I don't want it to be quite so green. Okay. I'm also going to move this up a little bit, and maybe I'll increase the strength to like 2000. Okay. So it's going to be a little bit faster, a little bit more varied. Okay. And then let's play them all back together. And I think everything's happening too fast. Yeah, I think that's all too fast. Let's double everything. So 3.6 for this one. And actually, scale of 4 is probably good for that one. And let's go 4.6 for that one. Let's see what that feels like. I think I lost a little bit of that life. Let's go to 3. Let's change that to like 2. So at this point, it's just playing around with settings until you get something that feels good. Okay, that works. And then again, you can do whatever camera animation that you so desire. I'll get... Actually, we'll do that right now. There's no reason to wait for another setup. We'll just do another camera animation. Kind of jumping back and forth. So those are the lights that I like. Let's go into... We'll add another camera. There it is. I'll double click on it to name it. We'll call this Cam 03 Fire. Okay. And we'll move it up a little bit. I'm going to hit Control 0. It's going to make that the active camera. You can also go to View, Cameras, Set Active Object as Camera. Okay. And I'm going to hit N. I'm going to go to Lock Camera to View. This is how I like to position my camera, at least initially. This is going to be a really close shot. Again, I'm going to keep the light on the opposite side. Okay, so if the light's coming from over here, I'm going to put the camera to the left side of it. Alright. And I think what I want to do... Well, let's see. What does it look like if I look this way? Again, I'm going to go into rendered view to get a better sense of... Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start here. Alright. So we'll go to the first frame in this sequence. So frame 250. And I'm going to hit I, and we're going to add a location and a rotation keyframe. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the last frame. And I want to move this down. I want to bring this gauge in here. And I'm going to rotate it around the z-axis. So, something like that. And we'll expand this out a little bit more so I get a better sense of what this is going to look like. Okay. And we can go into rendered, or material preview. You can see the lighting isn't quite as accurate, but that's okay. Still get a sense of what's going on. And then I'm going to hit I, and we'll set another location keyframe. Okay, so we kind of move down and rotate. Alright, I want to feel like there's a little bit more of a rotation here. So I'm going to watch this back from front view. Okay, so it is rotating. Let's change this focal length to 85, so we'll zoom in a little bit more. And let's see. I think we need to move this back a little bit as well. Actually, maybe we'll start it like over here. Oops. Make sure we're on the right frame. Start it maybe over here. I don't know why that keeps jumping on me, but that's alright. We can fix that. And if I hit GZZ, it's going to... Whoops. GZZ. There we go. I can, like, dolly the camera back a little bit. Let's try that. So I'm going to hit I, location, rotation. You can see I wasn't on the correct frame here. So I'm just going to select that keyframe, hit G, and just move it back. So now it's on the right frame. So if we're going to start there... I'm going to delete the second keyframe. And then we'll just re-add it. So I just want to rotate it and move it down. I don't like that. Changing my mind, which happens a lot. Sometimes you just have to see something to do it. Let's go to 35, maybe. And we'll go to solid view so I can see what I'm doing. Hit N and go to Lock camera to view. Okay. So let me actually... I'm going to delete that keyframe as well. I'm going to start at the end. I know where I want the camera to finish. So I know I want it to kind of finish right here, I think is like that. That's where I want it to... I'm going to go to 24 millimeters there. There we go, that's feeling better. Okay, so that's where I want the end frame to be, so I'm going to hit I, location, rotation. I'm going to go to the first frame, and I want this to move up. So GZ, and I want it to rotate over. Maybe let's try that. That might be too much movement. And I'll hit I. Let's play that back. Okay. That's moving kind of fast. Let's try something. Let's go to the graph editor. With everything selected, hit A. And I want to make this T linear. I'll play that back again. I don't know why this... There we go. Okay. So that feels slower, which is good. And I think this is just not quite ending in the right spot. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to select my Z location, double click on it, frame it up with the number pad period, hit N to hide all of that, and I'm just going to hit G and Y and move both keyframes down. So we'll end like there. Okay. So now, there we go. So we've got kind of a compound move. Camera's both moving down and rotating, which is great. But we can go a little bit further with this. And that's going to be with focus. So I'll go back to my viewport over here. And I want the initial focus to be maybe... I'll grab this, hit Shift S, cursor to selected. Shift A, add an empty, and we will call this Cam 03 Focus. Okay. I'm also going to change the size of this to like 0.5. Doesn't need to be quite that huge. And I'll move this out in the Y direction here. So if we want this to initially focus kind of right on this intersection here. And I'm going to go to Material Preview here, and I'm also going to turn off Scene Lights and Scene World so I can get a better sense of how this is going to focus. I'm going to grab my camera, turn on Depth of Field, set my focus object to Camera 3 Focus. And I'm going to change my f-stop. Let's go to like 1. You can see that's starting to come into play. If I go to full screen here, you can see that depth of field even better. So because the camera's so close, I'm going to go with a more extreme depth of field. I wouldn't go too much beyond this though. You don't want to go like, if you go to 0.2, now this is just kind of silly. So we're going to go, let's keep it at 1. And that's good. I don't have to keyframe. You can keyframe all this. I'm not going to. Add some blades. This is like aperture blades if you want to get really specific. Some lenses have 7, some have 11, some have 9, some have 8. And it'll just affect kind of the shape of the bokeh, the out of focus areas. It's a really subtle effect, not going to make a huge difference, but you have that option if you want it. Okay, so that's where that is going to start. So I'm going to select my focus empty, hit I, and add a location, a keyframe, and then I'm going to go to our last frame, and I'm going to select my gauge, hit Shift S, snap cursor to selected, and then select my empty, Shift S, selection to cursor. It'll move my gauge right where I want it. And if we look closely here, we actually need this to go a little bit forward. And then we'll hit I and set a location keyframe. Okay, so now let's watch this back. So we're moving down, and as this comes in the frame, it focuses. Now, the one thing that I'm noticing here is it's going a little fast. I want to spend a little bit more time with the gauge in the foreground. So I'm going to add like 60 frames. So let's go to like 410. And I'm going to move this keyframe to like 390. So this is the focus, or I want it to be in focus, not before the camera finishes moving. Then I'll grab my camera and we'll move it down here. Okay. And I'm just going to make this go down. Whoops, wrong thing. Select the camera, please. There we go. Move it down a little bit more. Rotate it a little bit more. And I location rotation. Okay. Play that back. Alright, I kind of like what's going on here. I want this to be the start frame. So, I'm going to hover over this, or put the playhead at that frame, and then I'll hit I. I'm going to add a keyframe there, and I'm going to just move that on top of the initial keyframe, so now that's my starting position. And we move down, move down. There, that feels better. Okay. Last little bit of animation that I want to do is a real subtle one, but we'll start like maybe here. I'm going to hit I and set a rotation keyframe, and then maybe here, R, and double tap Y to rotate around the local Y. And let's rotate it all the way into the red. And if I wanted to get fancy, I'd have it like move and maybe jitter a little bit at the end. I'm just going to leave it there for now. Okay. So now, this camera moves down. There we go. Okay. So there's some compound camera animation. We have depth of field being animated. We have the camera's position. We have the camera's rotation. We also have light animation. So we go back here. Kind of see this is what we're doing here. And with the firelight, it gets really dramatic, and this suddenly becomes a very important gauge that is signifying something maybe ominous with the firelight. So it's helping. It's all working together to help tell a story here. I'm also going to save. I haven't saved in a while. So that's most of what I want to cover. There's one more camera thing that I wanted to cover. I mean, you saw it a little bit here with the firelight, but you can do look targets with lights as well. And then you can animate individually both where the lights are looking and the light's position, and get some cool effects that way. You can animate color if you want to, and that works the exact same way. So if I go here, I'll turn off that fire group. I'll turn on this teal light. And what we can do with the teal light here, at frame 250, we will hit I. We'll hover over the color field of the light properties. Hit I. There's a very subtle outline here, but it's there. And then I can go here to the last frame and change this to, we'll go like super obvious red, and hit I. Okay, so now this light, as we get into red, ooh, scary things. And maybe we'll turn those firelights back on just for fun. Okay, so now, little fire, things starting to turn red. There's our firelight. Danger, danger, right? So you can combine all these things together, get some really kind of dramatic and complicated things happening without a whole lot of effort. Again, it's like a lot of things that I've shown you, it's the same 2 or 3 tools, just layered on top of each other and applied in multiple ways. So I'm going to do rendering in the next video. There's just one last thing that I want to cover here. So for that, I'm actually really happy with how all that turned out, but we will turn these things off, and we're going to do one more camera, and this is going to be just a simple 360, which I probably should have done earlier on in the video because it's like I said, a simpler thing than that firelight thing that I just did, but it's all pretty easy. So I'm going to Shift-C, center my 3D cursor, and we're going to first add a camera. I'm going to hit M immediately to create a new collection, and we'll call this, let's call it 360. Click OK. And I'm going to move that over here. I'll hide this camera just so we're not getting confused. And we'll move it up a little bit. I'm not worried about where it's looking because I'm going to use another look target, but first I want to hit F2 and rename this camera. This is going to be cam 04 360, and then we'll add in our empty, and then we're going to rename this. This is going to be cam 04 look, and we'll move this up, and we'll just center it right in the middle of the ray gun. Probably went a little too far back there. Okay. We'll also go to, we'll change our frame ranges here, so we'll say 500. 500 to, we'll say like 10 seconds, so it's going to be another 240 frames, so to 740. Okay. And we'll adjust here. Expand that out so we can see the whole range. Alright. So there's our look target. Let's set up that constraint. So I'll select the camera, and I'll add object constraint track to -Z, Y up, and set this to cam 4 look. Okay, so now that's looking, which is great. And now for the 360, I'm going to add one more empty plane axis. You can also, with this empty, if you want to make it like a circle, you could do that. Like I said, I'm just going to use these regular empties. I'm going to rename this empty. This is going to be cam 4. And this is going to be rotate. So I'm going to select the camera, and I'm going to shift select my new empty, my rotate empty. Hit Control P, set parent to object to keep transform. Okay. And so now what I can do is we can start the camera wherever we want. So I'm going to hit Alt-G, and that's going to clear the camera's location. It's basically going to reset it back to 0. And then I'm going to move it out along the Y-axis. I'm also going to hit Control-0 to make that the active camera. Again, that's also View, Camera, Set Active Object as Camera. Okay, so here's frame 1. You can see we also need to bring some lights on, so let's turn some lights on. Let's see. Let's also... what other light do we want to add? You'll see now that we've made our teal light red. Let's go with this area light on the right. Okay. Make sure they also render. Alright. So we have that. Whoops. Undo whatever I just did. Oh, that's right. Hit N, turn off lock camera to view. When you see that red outline here, that means that lock camera to view is on. So I'm just going to uncheck that. Okay, so set my initial starting position. Right now it's kind of looking up on it, which I think I like. So I'm going to keep that there. And I'm going to hit I to set a... Actually, I don't have to animate the camera. It's just this empty that I have to animate. So let me select that empty. We can also go... You see my Cam 4 look and rotate empties aren't in the right group. So I'm going to M, change that to that collection. Okay. So I'm going to grab this rotate. I'm going to hit I to set a rotation keyframe. And then I'm going to go to the last frame. And I'm going to say R, Z, and 360. And hit I. And add another rotation keyframe. So I'm going to hit play. And now you can see that we are getting our rotation. And it's looking pretty cool. So, the one thing that well, okay, there's a couple of things here. The first thing is that the background leaves, which you may like, you may not like. Like floating black with white is pretty cool. I don't mind that at all. But just to show you an alternative, if I want everything to go with it, really it's only this back and this light are the only two things that we're missing. So I'm going to select both of those and then zoom in here and select my rotate empty. On frame 1, hit Control P, and now those are parented to that rotate empty as well. So now when I hit play, you can see that that is also rotating with it. Now what's happening is when these corners of the ground are there, you see we're getting these shadows, which I don't like. So I'm going to also add the ground plane to my center empty, Control P. Now I hit play, and you really don't see much. This drifts a little bit, probably because it's not perfectly centered, but that's okay. It is perfectly centered. Huh. Oh, it's because my look isn't centered. So I'm going to select that, go to the object properties, and I'm going to set the Y location to 0 as well. Now it's looking pretty good. I don't like that. I'm going to undo that. Okay. So maybe some tweaking is involved. But now I have a nice ease in, ease out 360. You could make that linear if you wanted it to repeat, and you'd only have to render these frames, and you could just kind of stack them up in the whatever program you use to compile the frames into an animation. But that's really it for light and camera animation that I wanted to show you. There's certainly more things you can do. You can animate a camera along a curve. You can, there's more constraints we can get into, but I think I've rambled on enough about this. So, check D2L for the specifics of homework, but next I'm going to record a hopefully shorter video just about how to render these out so that you can see them played back in real time if your computer isn't working on it, and then also just, eventually you will want to render these as finished animations. So that's next.